suliw no sa pamil ko karaoy lamam ma ponga do mu le ma ta malungil litasil se aki merenga suliw no sa pamil me atendra tial al hearing re lalsil se chairman nakata ma president tra bangkal David Proctor ma rebekal board of members me bok introduce ko ngartyang atangakal president tra senate tel Hokons Paules ma atangakal al chairman of Ways and Means al senator Inabo ma senator Rudim ma senator Cuartey ma senator Salvador Talams ma vice chairman at Talgamitil at ang floor leader Cecilil Aldabe ma senator Mason Whips ma senator Sangbaw ma senator Singino ma senator Mangsaw ma senator Tabalwal Aki mloom ko tong me chairman naling kora timla so mam kora pemtum ekim kuk mestri ra atrabor de polse pemil kuk introduce ra as president trabang kalmer kamam na atra senate direkal pom pas kamam Michael kuk kora a report malubong kora atletele labang kal momre katara kam sa pamim report rawayal kora statement trabang Michael kuk kosong labang kara raigel almaral mail kuk kora initiative sel kami asomil momrul malubeng eng agenda bangka koram la mokle move forward del mong laban tira adrapor ma president mangkal as president trabang makmo maskawa awlale chairman Bukti pom siya kay Okoy ma president tra abang ko man sulang.
Militasil sila korkobul trakal senators may korka chairman. Abang kay karelal litasil sa ladrabor ng Maria Lina Thomas. Aberdil Raway. Buenhard Silas. Ralph Boses. Matutit Chilton. En kal ngarak dit atu ko ruba karang bar dang kay CEO rabang kang Clela David Proctor. Kadir kangat mlartial email ko ina. Tiktu kay gida introduce tiya na mombre introduce tiya admam. Madito statra dialogue or gida yung besing malga mala agenda. Magidi mo entertain ay gel questions ay gel model sa ma'am respond ay gibo provide a response from sudah.
Nakulngit at chairman namati pay tapos kamate alam po bas kamamsel al report tabel submit niya arabang kalmay dito mo ursaykit ito ko page by page cycle al agenda ki lil artian basically kiting il arte kit report pato mo ursaykit ito kami tutang give an opportunity for Mr. President of the bank to give us the report and please introduce yourself to the rest of the senators as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon. President of the Senate, Chairman of the Committee, Senators, also to Chairman of the Board and my fellow directors, good afternoon. I've been with the bank 6 months now, and I'd just like to put on record my appreciation for all the support and assistance I've received from the Finance Minister, from Chairman and fellow Board Directors, and especially from the 19 staff at the bank who are working incredibly hard. I think the bank has good energy, good momentum. We've got a clear direction, a clear purpose. But I say all of that without any sense of arrogance or self-satisfaction, because there's clearly a long way still to go as we develop the bank to enable the development bank to support the Palauan economy. So I've produced a report which I hope achieves the right balance between giving this committee the insights and the information it needs to understand what are the big issues, but doesn't go into too much detail. It tries to focus on the really core issues that are facing both Palau in the financial sector and the bank. So if it would please the committee, if I can, shall I just take us through the report?
Yes, please go ahead and take us through the report, and then let in mind that the committee and the senators keep notes on the report on page by page. So when he finished the report, then everyone can ask questions through with the report.
Thank you, Chairman. So the report is basically in three sections. The first section highlights what I think are the big issues for Palau in the financial sector. The second section summarizes the actions that have been taken over the last 6 months. And the final section is what are the big challenges facing the bank today. There's also appendices with detailed financial information, also information on the status of the submission that is pending to the Senate on the budget law, and also a summary of the products that the bank currently provides. But at the top of page 2 of the report, that's the start of the first section, and I'm highlighting here what I think are the big 5 issues for the financial sector in Palau. The first one is what I would call a market failure in Palau. And that is that for rational reasons, most Palauan deposits are placed with the branches of the American banks. And for equally rational reasons, most of those deposits are not used by the American banks to lend to Palau. 90% of them are lent to support their business activities offshore. That is not something that's new. It's been here for many years. And I think the actions that the bank is beginning to take is part of the solution to address that. But there are, I think it's very important that we all recognize that it's a basis of rationality that this situation has arisen. Effectively, Palauans place deposits with the banks because they're FDIC insured, they have good quality products and services, they have ATMs, they have internet banking, they have mobile banking. It's entirely rational for deposits to be placed with the American banks. It's also entirely rational that those banks don't lend to Palau for 3 reasons. Firstly, it's very hard for those banks to assess risk. They can't assess risk because most SMEs in Palau don't provide financial accounts. And there's also no credit bureau, which is typically what's in place in many other countries that allow banks to assess risk. The second reason is those American banks can't own land in Palau. So they can take collateral, but they can't make a credit bid at a foreclosure auction. So they can't mitigate their risk. And the third reason is they can't price for risk because there's an interest rate cap in Palau. Specifically, their concern would be the cap on SMEs, which is 4% over prime. So for entirely rational reasons, most deposits go outside Palau. And that's something where we can talk further about the actions that the bank is taking. The second issue I'd like to raise for the committee is the lack of mortgage insurance available for Palauans. I'm struck in the first 6 months here at how important custom insurance is in Palau. And I see regularly customers come to the bank asking for loans for them to attend funerals, to pay off the debts of the deceased. It's a tradition that I don't want to change and have no intention of affecting. But what I see is an increasing financial burden on surviving family members. And I worry with the increasing cost of construction, of land, of housing materials. I don't know how long Palauan society can maintain this approach, this culture. So what I see in other markets is that insurance companies provide mortgage insurance, which typically is taken out by younger homeowners, first-time homeowners, when the insurance policy is relatively cheap. And when they pass away, the remaining debt is paid off by the mortgage insurance policy, not by the surviving family members. So I would encourage the country to consider ensuring there is a mortgage insurance provider as an opportunity for Palauans to consider. The third thing that I would highlight is the reliance on loans from non-FIC licensed lenders. I would call them payday lenders. Typically, these loans are short-term loans lent at the highest possible interest rates under the usury law, 18%. And I think there's 10 actions that I've listed in this report that the bank is now taking to see or to try to assist people that are under significant financial stress to alleviate themselves from this high interest burden. The fourth big issue, and I know that we have senators in the room that know far more about the construction industry than I ever will do, but the fourth issue that I see is contractors' bonding requirements. Palau's procurement law that was passed some years ago has a requirement for contractors to provide bonds. I think there is a dispensation in the law, especially for CIP, to allow a discount for when the contracts are more than $250,000. But I think there is a possibility for Palau to review the limits that were established many years ago, if only because inflation has had a significant impact since then on what the minimum amounts should be for bonding requirements. And then the fifth thing that I see impacting the bank as we try to support the homeowner and real estate market here is the lack of a national building code and the lack of trained Palauans in a range of associated roles in the construction sector, whether it be trained architects, trained draftspersons, trained property inspectors, trained construction engineers, trained property appraisals. All of that is creating a practical difficulty for homeowners as they seek to get good quality designs, good quality materials, good quality finishing. And I think, again, that's an area that the bank is trying its best to give the support that we can. So in summary, those would be the big 5 issues, and I'd be happy to go into detail on any of those 5 if you have questions on those.
Thank you, Mr. Proctor. While everyone is looking into their papers, and we do have some senators that have some questions. Come on, Senator Inabo. I'll yield the floor to Senator Inabo.
Malungilita silse Chairman Nakata, mga Rogul Board members, sulang al masabi ulmeril alita silsa. Salom zara abangeng ra kloa net loser nira last year mel alir mang komal masaulal may masabetal wukura mo ungil ka o dagil kinilawang ka. Thank you, Mr. Proctor, for coming this afternoon. We appreciate you taking the time to give us an update of how the bank is doing. You know, we had the bill passed for NDBP to accept deposits because of the issue that you mentioned about all of our deposits going off island, 90% of it going off island to support other economies, and none of it stays in our own economy. And our biggest challenge is this FDIC bank's regulatory requirement that prohibits them from investing more money here because of the risk and other issues. So not too familiar with them, but this has been ongoing for a while. So I'm looking at 1.2 on this page, and you're saying that NDBP will submit an application to FIC and for NDBP to start accepting deposits, and that you're going to work with the MOF and ROP savings bond to make more investment stay in our economy. Can you please give us more detail on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I think the issue of the Development Bank taking deposits has been a long-standing discussion in Palau. I think RPPL 941 was passed in 2014. So I know this has been under discussion for many years. My view on this is quite clear. Firstly, as I've just highlighted, it's a fundamental issue of national interest to Palau to address the lack of financial intermediation from the FDIC banks. Secondly, I think there's been discussion in the past about whether development banks typically do or do not take deposits. The research that I see shows that the majority of development banks in low-income countries do take deposits, primarily because they don't have access to other broader money market sources of funding. The third point I would make is that a development bank is very different from a commercial bank. A commercial bank, its prime objective is profit. A development bank, there are 369 development banks in the world. And they were created for three reasons. The first is to address market failures. And this issue of lack of lending into the Palau economy is a clear market failure. The second reason development banks were established was to incubate new products and markets, and I can talk about that as some of the things that we're working on. The third was to accelerate industrialization. That's what Development Bank of Singapore, Development Bank of Korea were established for. So for NDBP, we focus on the first two. And I see deposit taking for NDBP as part of the mechanism to address the market failure. So I think the bank should take deposits. Now, the point about development banks is that development banks should not compete directly head-on with the commercial sector. Development banks are there to fill the void from market failures. So when we take deposits, assuming that the FIC approve our application, when we take deposits, we will only offer term deposits, fixed-term deposits, and long-term savings accounts. We will not be offering checking accounts. We will not be offering short-term deposits or immediate withdrawal deposits. We will not be offering ATMs. We will not be offering debit cards or credit cards, and we won't be offering merchant terminals. And the reason for that is that all of those things are already very well provided by the existing private sector banks. So there is no need for the development bank to compete head-on and use national resources, something where there isn't a need. But there's a clear need for this development bank to step in and offer long-term deposits, both to Palauans, but also to offshore investors. The idea being that the development bank should try to encourage an inflow of funds from offshore to offset the outflow of funds taking place from the FDIC-insured banks. So, as the report says, the timing, since I arrived, a huge amount of work has taken place to assimilate the regulatory requirements that the FIC has. And we intend to submit an application for a banking license from FIC by the end of March. The FIC will then conduct their standard review. I would assume it will take at least 2 months. And at that point, they will assess whether the bank should be issued a banking license. If we have a banking license to be regulated by FIC, we would then initiate the process internally to put in place the policies, procedures, systems to start offering deposits. So even if we get the license, we can't immediately offer deposits. But the clear message I want to give to the Senate is that there's a commitment from the bank to pursue this very actively so that we do begin to fill the void of the funding. Savings bonds. The issue with savings bonds is to provide a second alternative investment for Palauans as well as for offshore investors. In developed markets, fixed income bonds are another source of funding and capital for companies as well as banks. Here, the idea was successfully launched in Japan many years ago, where individuals in Japan purchase bonds that are issued by the Japanese government as a savings product. In other words, it's an alternative to placing deposits with banks. It then allows the Japanese government to determine how to recycle those funds back into its domestic economy. Exactly the same idea is being explored for Palau. It's being done in conjunction with the support of specialists from Japan, and it's being led by the Ministry of Finance. And NDBP is playing its role with a view to potentially distributing those bonds to the customers that we deal with on a daily basis. So that program, I would say, is a much longer term program. I don't have a clear date as to when that could be implemented. But again, I think it's a very good, very complementary approach to the bank taking deposits to try to recycle the funds back into the local economy.
Do you anticipate any risk return adjustment to your portfolio because of FIC being FIC regulated bank?
The current regulations for the bank are set out in the NDBP Act, which are slightly different from the international banking regulatory standards that the FIC abides to. As we've looked at and analyzed the impact of switching over from the NDBP regulations, as in the Act today, into the FIC regulations, we don't see any significant change in terms of capital requirements, for example. I think one thing that the bank does have to develop is its ability to manage its liabilities. In other words, its liquidity risk. At the moment, because the bank just has loans and grants that it uses to fund, it's quite straightforward. As it builds a deposit base, there's more of a requirement for what we call an asset liability committee to manage that risk, and that's why we're putting that in place as well as part of this program.
Okay, my last question on that to require the FDIC banks to have a certain percentage of their funds deposited locally? What sort of percentage are you looking at?
I think this is something, I just put it in the report because I've seen it applied in other countries, where other countries have faced similar situations where foreign banks have been major players in the local financing sector. And typically foreign banks, for all the same reasons as in Palau, tend to be less attracted to lending to high-risk, small and medium-sized businesses. So I've seen in other countries a requirement where the central banks, obviously we don't have a central bank, but where the central bank would assign a minimum amount of their deposits that need to be funded towards the SME or domestic commercial sector. It could be 25% or it could be whatever percentage was deemed appropriate. And if the foreign banks were unable to meet whatever the target set, then they would place the remaining, the shortfall to that target with the National Treasury or the central bank. It's a, I would call it a blunt mechanism, but it is one potential option to consider for Palau.
Thank you.
I'll give the floor to Senator Sangabao.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Proctor, since you have outlined that you'll be offering limited services as far as the deposits, what would be the attraction then for, I mean, if we're just going to do it just for the sake of doing it to satisfy the law but no depositors, then what's the point? So how would you sell it to me that, okay, I want to go and put in my money? Is because you're going to be offering more higher interest than Bank of Hawaii or other, so could you please...
Well, let me put it this way. I went into one of the FDIC banks last week. I asked what their interest rate was for a 6-month term certificate of deposit. Their response was 0.03%. So I think there's a potential to do better than 0.03%. Now, again, this is not a criticism of the foreign banks. I've been a foreign banker for a large part of my career. Remember, they're focused on profit. What they do extremely well. And we should be delighted that they're here in Palau. But those foreign banks at the moment are extremely liquid, which means they have far more deposits than they need to support their current loan portfolio. So there is no incentive for them to offer very high interest rates on their deposits. But to answer your question, I do think there's room for NDBP to offer some slightly more competitive rates for long-term deposits.
Ti follow-up, Chairman, ako masang maldir ka kora fresh sa memory ra yalguk net selnet tarabanga. Makulingit mong tiagi del kora part ra deliberation kami mosesing gire del mo urior sa igi deling kadwa kora diri ka madak te mal diswa da igi del banga. Mam kora mo mesing Chairman kasi mamagara damral ensure ada bela kumda samo sel mo kora over the tell urior sel kamiul kan pinsa ada bela kasi oy maududil me leng klo interest marusa mal ge komdir ge magarangi makti dulise mergo sula chair
Aulaw mo na Senator Rutim.
Sula Chairman, good afternoon, President and CEO of NDBP. Chairman Raward, Mother Raward. So the question tell mala deposit NDBP. This is the domestic report President and CEO and Anisha Gadrala write off bad loans, about $5 million plus, which reflect to us say mala deposit the way say performance bank macro write off. It's risk management. And then ang mention ragal FDIC banks offer a very low interest rate, kind of trying to discourage the depositors not to put their money in the bank due to the low interest rate. So it becomes an option to the depositor. So they have to find another way for the use of their money. So to the concern, Mr. President of the CEO, you wrote also that there's a risk that you might turn off the FDIC banks. Can you explain why are you applying for a license knowing that there's a risk that you might turn off the FDIC banks at this time?
Banking is all about risk management. And the purpose of a development bank is to prioritize the national interest. I think it's very much in the national interest for the Palau economy to not be constrained to the extent that it is today by lack of access to financial services and products. And I think the wider the range of providers, the wider the range of products and services, the better. If there's a concern about risk management for liquidity in terms of managing the deposits, that is what banks do on a daily basis. I understand the staff in the development bank have not had to do that in the past, but we are putting in place the necessary training and processes to manage that. I think the broader question for us, and I don't have a clear answer to this, is what will it take for foreign investors to place deposits at the bank? What would be the incentive for them? Now, I think an easy part of that is to talk to or work with the FIB so that as foreign investors look to open businesses here and they place their normal deposit with FIB, that deposit is placed with NDBP. But above and beyond that, what I would like to explore is to what extent the deposits offered by NDBP could be the beneficiary of a guarantee similar to the FDIC scheme, which would have to be a sovereign guarantee. Now, clearly that is something that will need a lot of discussion and analysis as to whether it's the right thing for the national interest. But those are all part of the potential solutions to provide in order to, we call it, increase the velocity of cash in the economy. In other words, to give air, oxygen to businesses that are trying to grow here. Did I answer your question, or did I miss the?
Thank you. Chairman, I think the issue for the foreign investment funds to come in, I think the two barriers to, like a deterrence to the foreign investment funds to come in, I think is the AML and the KYC requirements. How do you propose on going to attract those kind of investors who don't wish to go through the AML KYC requirements of the FIC?
With that one, I have a very straightforward answer. I have no interest in any funds that are not willing to go through KYC and AML process. It's very important for Palau's credibility and reputation internationally to be of the highest standard. So I think FIC have high requirements for anti-money laundering and know your customer. We have similar policies in place for politically exposed persons, which would include every single person in this room, and frankly, most of the Palauan society, because of the way that that PEP regime operates. And I have absolutely no intention of cutting corners or trying to circumvent around those regulations. It's very important for the bank to uphold them.
Thank you for the assurance. Chairman, so here's another one that's an option to attract these foreign investments. Can you do a parallel route to protect the FDIC, the requirements of the FAT 40+11, and do a parallel route directly to Palau for people who want to take risk in Palau to deposit, but you segregate the funds. You put a Chinese wall or something to segregate those funds, to separate those funds so they don't trigger the alarms of the KYC AML requirements.
No, I'm not interested in any schemes, any games. Okay, I've been a banker throughout my career. A banker has a career based on their credibility and reputation. You do one thing wrong at any time in your career, you're no longer a banker. And I'm not about to come to Palau and start dreaming up schemes that are not in accordance with the highest international standards. That's not the purpose of me being here, and I don't believe there's anybody in this room that would want me to do that.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Proctor. And till after the Chairman Basilius, what do you think of of Palau entering into the cryptocurrency world, where they do a stable coin, monetize the dollar, and do a quote unquote a sovereign backed crypto coin?
So the first thing to highlight is that NDBP is not part of the stablecoin pilot scheme, which I think is in the second phase. I think there's more than 100 central banks around the world that are evaluating central bank digital currencies or cryptocurrencies in various forms, including stablecoin. So I think it's not surprising that Palau is evaluating it. I think in many countries there's still a long way from implementing those programs. In theory, there are benefits to stablecoin in terms of efficiency of the transactions, the reduction in transaction fees, but it's highly complex, and the market here is relatively small. So that's why I didn't put it as one of my top 5 priorities for the Palau financial sector. I'm more than happy to support the exploratory work that's taking place, if that's required. NDBP is not involved at this stage. But for me, it's not one of the top 5 issues that I've highlighted in the report.
So, like Chairman, again, just to share the concern for the legislative side, the Congress side, the stablecoin is quote unquote on a pilot project, but I think there's no legislative basis to support that. And the other concern was if other experimenters wish to do that, are we going to allow a dozen to do the same exploratory work? So please note that on the record, and we don't want to use the institutions as a practicing ground for something that has not been legalized. Thank you.
Maria Dirga, Chairman, Vice, yeah, come on. Aula mo na Vice Chairman, Senator Aldabel.
Sulang Chairman. Malungil litasil se Chairman na nakatama kami members sa aboard mamalmsal as in member ko kaso se mo accounting igel ko ureredel under ang kalbesel al CEO President. As I understand, Mr. Proctor, you have a very extensive banking background, so I consider the bank NDBP to be very lucky to have you to lead the development of the bank. I don't have a very complicated question. I just want to make some comment. I think we all expect a development bank to be supporting the development of our domestic economy. And that includes supporting housing development, supporting SMEs, supporting other economic sectors to prosper in a way. And doing that, you offer affordable financing, provide a diversity of financial product that can certainly support these different areas of development. And I'm really happy to hear that you were able to look at what we have in terms of the mandate of the bank and the existing laws, and to include the law that has been in place for some time and hasn't been implemented, the deposit taking. And I'm glad you are immediately assessing how best to or what would be the best approach to doing that. And I think you rightfully mentioned that to do a regular deposit taking, short term and long term, may not be feasible at this time for the bank, but maybe the more long term deposit will be something that will be more meaningful in terms of raising capital for the bank and also for the management at the current level of capacity. So I would really want to see that you start during the board meetings, you start conveying all these ideas and recommendations for the board to consider and hopefully start making quick decisions, whether it's going to be a formulation of a legislative legislation to put into effect some of these things or that you have in plan. I think that will be something that we want to see. Also, we want to see that the board will be brought up to par with your level of understanding and with your recommendation, because I know when we talk about banking, it's a very complex industry, and sometimes our board and even our people in running the different programs of the bank don't necessarily understand what's the concept or what's the idea behind all these recommendations. So I think that's something I would like to see more for the board to start talking about, and when there's a need for this kind of meetings with the legislators, I think that would be something that will inspire the discussions to move things forward. Because a lot of time we talk about ideas, we talk about plans, and we talk about recommendations, but a lot of time when we don't clearly understand it, it takes quite a bit to get it to fruition. So that's just a sort of a comment I want to make, and I'm glad to see that you're looking at reducing the mortgage, the home mortgage rate, at least a point, and that's something that we like to see, even though we like it to be much lower, but at least that's a step forward, and that's something we want to see happening for the bank. So thank you for that, and I'm just looking forward to continue working with you in the days ahead.
Thank you, Senator. Well, firstly, I can assure you that the board are working extremely hard. I think what you are outlining is really the process that we've adopted. We have approved a strategy, an overall strategy for the bank. I have some clear ideas in terms of strategy papers. I've seen far too many strategy papers over the years that are full of waffle, are produced as a thick piece of document that then sits on a shelf collecting dust and doesn't have any difference. What I like to do is have a strategy that says this is what we're going to do, this is what we're not going to do, this is what we'll continue doing. And as part of that, have what I call a strategic agenda, which is these are the actions we need to take to execute. And that's how we manage progress and monitor whether we have the right momentum. So the board have been through that, have asked me tough questions, done the right governance process. That strategy has been approved and we're working through the agenda. Exactly the same process took place with the deposit strategy. And so later, I think in the second section of this report, it lists down the actions we've taken in the last 6 months, which I think is a lot. As a leader and manager, you have to think about the capacity, the human capacity, as to how much change or new ideas you can introduce at what pace. So I think we're moving well. We'll continue that process. On the interest rates, I was struck by the fact that when I looked, mortgage rates here had not been changed in 20 years. It is 20 years since this bank reduced mortgage interest rates. 20 years. So, so when I saw that, my job is to balance what's in the national interest for the borrowers, but also what's in the national interest for the bank. I'm not here to drive the bank into a hole. I'm here to look after the well-being of the bank on a long-term basis. So managing that balance is what is required of anybody sitting in this chair. But having done the assessment, I made two changes. One is to reduce mortgage rates by 1%. The second is to reduce the interest rate for fishing loans. Now, fishing is part of food security. It's part of Palauan culture. We already had subsidized rates for agriculture and aquaculture, but for historic reasons, I'm sure, the interest rate for fishing was 1% higher than agriculture and aquaculture, which is supported by a particular program. But with effect from the 1st of March, I've lowered the rates, the interest rates for fishing loans by 1% as well, from 8% to 7%. And again, if I may, just to put that in perspective, interest rates in the US have climbed significantly since March 22. So they went from 3.5% to 8.5% prime rate today. So that interest rate reduction is against the background of high interest rates at the moment. The equivalent entity of NDBP in the US is something called the Small Business Administration. Their interest rates for lending to SMEs ranges from 11.5% to 15%. So just to put in perspective the interest rates that we're offering, I think are competitive.
Well, thank you for sharing that information. My having what said what you said, I want to share with you. I don't know if you have had the time to look at that piece of legislation, but we passed a piece of legislation. I think 2 years into this administration, and now it's a law, and that was to create what we call a government trust bank. And I think the idea behind that legislation was to create a trust bank that will attract foreign investors' savings to shift their savings from whatever country they come from into Palau with the purpose of trying to generate more capital coming into Palau, and to use that capital, the government can basically put a guarantee on those savings or those investment, and use that money to finance infrastructure and other government projects. Something I thought maybe if you would have time to kind of see that bill or that piece of legislation, and maybe put up any kind of recommendation is whether we should continue with the idea or repeal the bill at all, because I think it's something. The idea is we want to explore different ways in which we can raise capital for the country.
Thank you, Senator. I'm aware of that bill, and I'll certainly go back and review it in more detail. I think globally there's been a lot of work since the global financial crisis in 2008, with some of the major markets having concerns about tax havens. So I think the intent of the bill is a good one. I think the important thing for Palau comes back to maintaining its international reputation and standing. So we don't want Palau to be perceived as a tax haven or attempting to become one. But it's very clear there's many markets around the world. I'm English. London would be a classic example of a major market that has huge inbound flows from offshore investors. So there should be no concern as to why a national country would want to compete in that same market as long as it abides by the international regulatory standards. But I'll be happy to look at that law in more detail.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Proctor, how about if we go ahead and you summarize the National Development Bank financial statement that we have in front of us? Oh. And I'll give the floor to Senator Sungino, and right after that, maybe... Oh, okay. Sungino and Inabo, about the forsake the financial statement.
So, Chairman, the government take it for a touch la point that you mentioned the government savings fund, and I'm really interested in trying to see how best we can see that, because you also mentioned the cultural part of financing in terms of us going to the funerals and so on. And the funerals are a culture checking account, but it's in the negative, as I see it, because we're lending money from the banks and we're going to the funeral. So it's a minus for us. We're constantly in the negative. But I see the government savings banks because I had the opportunity to sit and listen to the Chaiga representative who came and did the presentation. And I was really interested in, because I think it's, if we explain it good for the Palauan people to really grasp the idea and the concept, then they can invest in that kind of proposal, because we want to help, but we don't understand that. That's our problem. We need to clearly put it in the layman terms so the individual like me can really understand it. And because when you say government savings fund, I'm thinking about the COFA funding, how it can be the security in terms of how we can connect those three things. So I, as a Palauan, can put my money in the bond to help the country with infrastructure or whatever the development they want, but I have the security of the COFA fund to back me up if I lose my money. So, I'm not into financing, but I can see the connection, and I can see that we want to help our bank, but you have to put it in layman's terms so we can really understand and grasp the connection and how we can connect these things so we can be able to, put in our, because right now there's a Bank of Guam is offering 5% boost savings. You just say 5%, everybody is going to jump on that wagon. But they're shipping our money outside. And at the end of the year, they'll give you the 5% that you want. So, these are going in the community, and I'm trying really hard to think how can we connect these things, because if it's a government bond that's secured, I'm willing, as a Palauan, I am willing to help my country too, if I have that access to. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Just a few quick comments before we move on to the financials. Firstly, I think the savings bond is a terrific initiative, and I appreciate the suggestion from the Japanese authorities that this is something that Palau should consider. I'm very supportive of the program. Secondly, we're very much at the early stages. This is the equivalent of an artist just putting up an easel. The artist hasn't even started painting yet. So this program is going to require a lot of technical work. There's relatively few people in Palau that have the technical capability to work on it, but I will be absolutely putting all my efforts to support this program because I think it is for the benefit. Thirdly, in terms of communication, I completely agree with you. Bankers can talk in a foreign language, and I think we have to reach out to people to explain in layman's terms, not to talk down to people, but to be able to communicate properly. I always think the sign of somebody that understands any technical aspect is when they can translate it into real English or a real language that anybody can understand. So one of the things that I've arranged, two things for the bank. One is I want the bank to be seen in the community. We tend to sit behind our desks in the bank building and expect customers to come to us. I'm trialing a marketing desk in a public location where we distribute leaflets. We have people sitting there and they can talk about the products and services the bank offers so that we're seen to be part of the community. We're not sitting in an ivory tower. Secondly, I've arranged a public workshop where I'll do a presentation on the 26th of March just to talk about the bank, give some context about the bank, talk about the priorities that we're working on, and address questions that the community has. As part of an ongoing program, I think the bank has to be much more active in two-way communication with the community, not just with the customers, but with the broader community. So I agree entirely with all the points you make.
I'll give the floor to Senator Inabo.
Sulangit, Chair. Mr. Proctor, I would like to, on this financial sector issues, you said that the bank has introduced a new 10-year secured loan product. Can you please explain what is that? And you also say there's a new finance lease product that you'll be launching at the end of this year. Can you explain what are those products?
Yes, thank you. It goes back, I think, to trying to encourage the availability of a broader range of products and services for Palauans to choose from. So the two products you mentioned, firstly, let me talk about what we call the home equity loan or a commercial real estate equity loan. It is one approach to alleviate people who are having to pay 18% interest from payday lenders. The idea is that if somebody has a house and that house has borrowing capacity against it, meaning that the mortgage is not too high, then the bank will provide a loan secured on that property with consent to mortgage from states if it's a state lease. And that loan would be a 10-year loan. The interest rate would be 10%. And the purpose of the loan could be used for any purpose. In the past, the bank has offered what it used to call microloans that was restricted to use which was related to property. This new product can be used for any purpose. And specifically what I'm thinking is it can be used to consolidate debt from payday lenders. So instead of paying 18% interest, a borrower can come to the bank can get a loan for 10 years at a 10% interest rate and immediately make a significant difference to their monthly repayment schedules and therefore their life. So I see that product as being a key step in trying to reduce some of the financial stress that I see in the community. Secondly, and that product can also be used to purchase boats, purchase cars. It's for whatever purpose the borrower needs. The second product, which is finance lease, this is something that we're working with the Ministry of Finance on. A finance lease is it's a different way of financing equipment. But it's a financial product that is very common in other markets. It ends up being a product that is much cheaper for the borrower to use than a loan. And that is why I think it's a benefit to introduce to Palau. We will introduce it initially for new cars. And the idea is to trial this product, as I say, by the end of the year. If the pilot is successful, then I would expect to extend it to a broader borrower base.
Thank you, Mr. Proctor. I think that brings to another Senator Cuarte, mo sa besa garubang.
Sulang itsirita, question mo Chairman aboard, mar other aboard. Yak Manila City ako ra policy level ending mle uldasul tilo tersira ongerul kan. Sa ngayon del current minister finance ako ra dimla alto da ako ra 8 siring mumlo da sa amle introduce siring marawla. Ako tul question na Silwa lela National Development Bank lo mesra investment ra ako ra waya retirement malubeng ngalgol lo aududel at the age of 45 and must withdraw el mrulablil or something magota ko sa el alda adudugin mar adram rigel edirgal pasra aba budget rigid ya atang sungino kam no mention sel ludo drakofa ngalia aldo pator do ng artang ngalia TJ ngalia mangsaw ngalia Florida ngalia Senator Inabo. Ngaraman dahil sa dalungo, portion or sell ngu investor niyo tilaya dito ito, bal, lo spending al sa lablur belaw. Emergo do mereka tayo investment rarang algo. So kaya dal ngalgal mo omangat. Ako na sa minimum 5,000 lang ngalgal mo omangat adali. Milstead mo sa gida negative flow mo telo dal ngalgal. El investor care tayo so at age of 45 malbal bara college etiam la tribal lom Google mas el help ring madi question ka sel sumang avalyura ako fantela so 300 million kami dun 50 million or even pwede bigyan 100 million ang markadir kami etiagit selbol basis ergidel release ergidel government bond. Ito spering il develop problem belaw. Maktuduli lo sa yiling kom adra board terkait policy makers ng artiang emrala negotiation ya ran hartal mutul mudur ter ngadi dong ko tel dangara ko ng masalari. Hindi why is that impossible? The Reinhardt. Just a thought, What do you do?
Me Senator Cuarte gim nautringi gora inatal gim adadu ulgirel didir ka further discussions ulgirel agino tringir el ange mo dadura panggal kalpa SLC or kuma.
Senator Inabo ulak mo ko, Chairman. Adi kan necessarily kada drawdown ng merbela di value ng arsayid el dollar tayo kanami against ringim so already ngari activity those very instead ra adi dam occurrel koraway idol. Makamil adra daw ng deka ngot ululdas wasag makrar activatory.
Kung da nga rin yabi lal nga ra committee ma.
Alabay correspond el bergani IDRT sel bol discussing el sibil dire ko incorporate tayo gido idea sige nga sa gido bill gido bill introducing ya ngira abang marbay pilar senators. We introduced the bill that's still under review of the Senate. We're hoping that you will be able to provide comments on the bill. And the idea was to sort of like reserve 3% of the amount of our trust fund money that's invested in the U.S. market. And instead of having it invested in the U.S. market, we bring that money into Palau and use it to finance or provide capital to the bank for the bank to use to finance local development projects. The idea that we're looking at is as I understand, trust fund. As I understand from our trust fund investment policy, there's allocation for equity, there's allocation for fixed income. So we're thinking the portion that's invested in the fixed income, which yield a very low return. If that's something that we can take a portion of it and instead of having it invested in the U.S. Fixed income market, we invest it in Palau, NDBP, for it to finance, to use to finance development. That was the idea behind the bill, and I'm hoping, in his question, I guess, was kind of asking the board if they would be able to consider something like that as a mechanism to raise capital and also help provide financing for the bank.
And it's not just for there are 300 kids born in Palau. So if you were to say there's a requirement that the family contribute $1,000 per kid every year, cumulative, to be drawn at certain age, and that can be used as part of the fund, I think that can actually grow up to be a good source of local revenue that we can use in the economy.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm very interested by that proposal. I think the way that banks are structured, every dollar of equity that the bank has, it can provide more loans into the economy. So typically, if we have $100 of equity, then we can lend 80 more each time. So we leverage up, meaning that you get a big bang for the buck if you invest in capital in a bank, because we're constantly recycling that back into the economy. It was one of the things that I put into the report that the Palau Development Plan 23 to 26, the latest version of the PDP, has a long list of high priority investments and infrastructure needs across every single segment of the society in Palau. And the maximum loan that the bank can offer at the moment is $5.5 million per borrower. So if the extension to a runway or if the relocation of the hospital those types of projects are going to need far more than that. So the more that the bank can increase its capital base, the more the bank can be effective in supporting the economy. The one caveat, of course, is that the bank has to be well managed, it has to be well governed. So there's a responsibility on whoever is sitting in these chairs that if those funds are allocated to the bank, then we have to make sure that we deploy them in the right way for the national interest. But I think as a principle, as a concept, I would absolutely support it, and I think it's a very good direction to explore.
President of the Senate.
Reinhardt musubis kumiawngil madang diak adra pangkama sil mosao deng lamomre katal sigang yang kadirga ngaral bokudeng no, I'm talking to your board member because I'm not a banking expert or anything that I can contribute. Or my question is, you are experienced in banking management, and we made a law to make NDBP to accept deposit, and we're expecting that when you accept deposit, then maybe you can use it to lend it to the customers. Is this good idea for NDBP to have a deposit in the bank? Because you said you only accept deposit and there's no credit card, no debit, no ATM. So you recommend that you should have this deposit in NDBP bank? Because as a customer, I just want to come to the bank and get a loan with a low interest. That's what, and I think that's what the people of Palau want to come to you and get a loan and with a low interest. That's what we're interested. And the population here is very small. So I'm kind of confused because, you have a loan for fishermen, you have a loan for farming, but there's no fishermen and there's no farmers. And then you have a big loan for them. So by the short time you're here, no fisherman is coming and get the loan. No farmer come and get the loan. So that's all. I'm kind of confused with this bank for, you get the money from people just to give out the loan for low interest, and then what the customer, to give deposit, what they're going to profit from this deposit.
Okay, thank you. So let me try to summarize what I think are the benefits for Palau, never mind the bank, but for Palau. The first benefit is the point that I was trying to explain earlier, that Palau has roughly $300 million of deposits. If I add up all of the individual deposits, the commercial deposits, the public sector deposits, is about $300 million. 90% of that money, which is Palauan money, is taken out of the country and sent to support lending offshore. So the first reason why the bank should take deposits, which is in accordance with RPPL 941, is to try to retain Palauan deposits and money in Palau so the bank can make loans to Palauans. That's the first reason. Second reason is that the bank will not compete with all financial products that the private sector banks offer. The reason for that is twofold. First, if the private sector banks are providing good products and services, there's no need for national funds to try to compete directly with them. However, there is a need for national funds to be focused on the areas where those foreign or commercial banks are not providing support for Palauans. And the obvious example for that is residential mortgages. The FDIC banks can't own land, so they don't offer home mortgages. So this bank, NDBP, is the dominant bank to support homeowners, first-time homeowners, regular mortgages. That's the first thing. The second thing is the foreign banks don't support the small and medium-sized businessmen here because the risk is too high. So this bank, NDBP, is the dominant provider of loans to the small and medium-sized businessmen in Palau. For us to provide more support to those two sectors, we need to have sources of funds. Historically, the bank has used funds from donations, from grants, from offshore. But if Palau is to develop as its independent nation, it should be using its own resources, its own money, to support the development of the economy. And that is why the proposal is for the bank to take deposits from Palau, use those deposits to lend back to Palauans. But we're not going to offer debit cards or credit cards because the commercial banks are already offering those services. There's no need for us to use national resources to compete. Let's use the scarce national resources in those areas that really have the greatest need.
Mr. Proctor, how about you go ahead and give us the rundown on the financial statement, and then after that financial statement, we'll go ahead and you can go ahead and proceed on telling us what are the activities that the bank are moving forward to, while everybody's looking at your report as well. And then after that, we can go ahead back to the questions and answers.
Thank you, Senator. I've tried to reach the right balance in terms of providing data and insights. It's easier for people in the financial sector to understand financial statements than it is for people who are not well-versed in financials. So let me just highlight the key themes that I see as I look at these financial statements. The first thing that I would say is that they clearly reflect the enormous damage that COVID had on the economy in Palau. And so for the period up until really I arrived, the bank was lending to support the small and medium-sized businesses, but those loans, many of those loans have not been able to be serviced by the borrowers, understandably. So as a result, the bank had built up a huge portfolio of bad debts. And within, I think, 6 weeks of my arrival, we wrote off $5.7 million of bad debt, meaning those loans were to borrowers who had no prospect of repaying those loans. So we wrote them off. The impact of that is that clearly it's a hit to the bank in terms of its capacity, but it's also a cleansing process, meaning that what we have in our financial performance now is what I would call real performing loans. In the past, it was hard to distinguish the bad loans from the performing loans. So as a result, as we move forward into the first 3 months, October, November, December of this fiscal year, we see that the bank's performance is beginning to stabilize, and we're now moving back to profitability. As I mentioned before, the aim of this bank is not profit. The aim of this bank is to perform the national interest. So I'm not trying to maximize profit, but I am trying to avoid losses for the bank. For the balance sheet, what I would say is that the bank has stabilized in terms of the amount of loans that it is lending. One of the priorities for me and the management team this year is to show growth in loans. So to simplify it, effectively by writing off bad debt, the size of our portfolio has reduced. Now, especially as the economy is beginning to improve, now the bank needs to be much more proactive, providing more loans to support the growth in the economy. So one of the key targets for the management team is to show loan growth across various product sectors. That's why we're introducing these new products. That's why we're reducing interest rates. On a cash flow basis, I think the key message for this committee or the senators to understand or recognize is the bank has sources of funds which basically have three categories. We have grants and donations, donors' funds from offshore, which are restricted in use. So we have a successful program to support installation of solar panels in residential homes, and we're shortly to extend that to commercial properties as well. But those loans can only be used for that purpose. Secondly, we have some sources of funds that can be used for any purpose, but that's relatively limited. And the third source of funds is the capital that's invested in the bank and the repayments that we receive from borrowers. So the key priority for me and the management team is to increase the amount of funding that we can use for any purpose, not just specific sources of funds tailored for specific programs. Offshore donors are very well-meaning, and we're very grateful for everything they do to support us. But sometimes their policy and priorities is not entirely aligned to what are the most important sectors to support the Palau economy. So that's why that broader source of funding is so important. But in summary, what I would say is the bank has suffered in exactly the same way as the Palauan society has suffered through COVID, that the bank has stabilized in terms of its financial performance. We're beginning to see some positive trends in terms of bad debt management, in terms of profitability, in terms of just overall activity level in the bank. But the priorities are to accelerate that, provide more loans through the year, and to try to source some broader sources of funds that are available for use in general purposes.
Senator Sangapau, kabang.
Thank you for that. Since you mentioned about those bad loans, as you recall, there's the supplemental budget, the chair, where we actually had asked the bank to look into those small, medium enterprises that were affected, and for you to provide us the information that hopefully the Congress can use to help those businesses that were affected and hopefully get back on track.
Thank you, Senator. On page 6 of the report, which is Appendix 2, I've summarized the findings so far. The bank is, I think the law states the bank should provide a report to OEK by the 27th of March, and we're on track to provide that. So this is the current status. Just to summarize the action that we took, we posted adverts in papers, on notice boards, we sent out reminders, and we sent letters to 316 SME clients. Out of that, the response has been poor. We've received only 22, a total of 22 responses. And out of those 22 responses, only 2 of them meet what's called the triggering mechanism in the law. So the triggering mechanism has certain requirements that SMEs have to pass in order to be subject to this budget law, and only 2 of the respondents so far meet those criteria. So the total amount that would be written off, subject to the appropriation of funds, would be $78,000, based on the data we've received so far.
Given, Chairman, ako mda so egal information na mo la makulangit tel kasi ndura staffer kami malkoler tirgal adel mel so kung mga nagigit information ni ak madangek mase diregal ba biel sel on print a newspaper nga kamaktirek kung kerteng diregal dia kudik masing sek malkmul mo ngrang makulangit tirgal adel lo other tir nga nagigit small medium enterprises sa chairman na dimlong alaw ng melo Airtel mo nagigit legang maro share sel kumdas sing adya kamal member silas ako na talgibel diregal nga kamaktirek admit kasi sila mo tabdi sila newspaper diregal mal talgibel ko makulangit mo color tirgal adel so mo mo la balister tire bo sa moral may egim mo sa kalba bilingi la kung manak masyo ko wala ba contact information ati Maldi sabele, ya mo idal mo ako ng ilangal so kung sual mo dangi.
So in terms of what we've done in terms of outreach, as I say, we've written to the clients. Our loan officers have been reaching out to the clients to remind them about this. I think, I'm doing the outreach program, the presentation where this will be covered as well. But I'm keen for the bank to follow the requirements of the law. So we will provide all of the information that we receive. But I agree, the response to date has been poor. We will try to remind clients as best we can, but we can only provide the Senate with the information that the clients provide.
Can the question follow up?
Senator Inabo.
Thank you, Mr. Proctor. You know that it's very challenging for us to provide financial reports for our businesses and for our activities, and maybe most of these people cannot provide the financial reports that's being required by the bank, and especially to show the revenue, how much revenue they had, and decline. So maybe we need to meet with the people who were meant to be assisted with this thing, and see your requirements and figure out how to make it possible for them to get the help that they should be getting, because a lot of times they don't have records of what they were making in the year 2018 or 2019, and maybe the language in the law is too restrictive in a way, so they cannot ever be qualified to receive the assistance, and that is our concern.
I recognize that. On a practical basis, I recognize that many SMEs don't maintain financial accounts, and I recognize that. But equally, the bank can only follow the law. These requirements are not from the bank. We're just simply following the triggering mechanism that the OEK has put into the law. So in RPPL 1131, it requires that borrowers have a certain level of net commercial assets, that they have average gross revenues of a certain amount, that they experienced a 50% decline. So we're just following the law. If the law changes, then we will follow the changes. But we can't not follow the provisions in the law. What I can do is I can provide all of the responses, and what the Senate will see is that some of the responses that we've received are for businesses that weren't operational during that period, for example. But I'm happy to provide all of the information that we receive, but we can only follow what's in the law.
Unite chairman mga do le gor gomer adra bor da gumdasse go momes tel spirit tel la gigi dum gigril shobay laga da gam pligay tringil wala bay gigi del tol kwate tela piusi sele betel on do urgama mel waisay agumdasse go understand ra do sadringi kadam lem sadra qase gigi del business el ngario ay gal tadi mose madek masay ga gal over 500,000 aval yuring pom ad adu e bay mo to bodi segi del momdasse se okmo mo kom for you ay gagi del interest mangarang en telang olbira kulula gira lol top le gor komiu ela ka nga tala idara ela ko metel top digital 78,000 di help prawan la tula kasi bay mo to bodil mer I have understand sila lengar alam mo osi gaigal mo help tirgal lel sukum mundia tirgal gidam biya karel buy tirgal otto da babilngi arwas shalom terwatang am araigal tira da kalau erta.
So, Mr. Proctor, please provide the records that you got from them, and we will look at them and see how can we tailor the language of the law so you can assist these people. Because we meant to help them, but if the record submittal requirement prohibits them from getting the assistance they need, then we need to tweak the language of the law. So we will appreciate getting the information.
I'll be
Thank
happy
you.
to. Yeah, I hear that.
Chairman, Turkey. Senator Sambawa, ngetila mal issue dil kaumar kalik sir concern al kirel. Ak member sir hearing er mam ko raising mang first part lang Wilma CEO rapang management la modrura routine process sa barato implement ringi logi wal ulabang course nga rin siya gidala mangal ata malas mal comply with the requirements set under the law. They would you take your suggestion la siya kabong im luto lo mesan ngi message is there another way kung sa the trigger to attract more responses. So give us some time igibo ikim do and then we'll get back to you. On our cell request Madam Senator Inabo Adam.
Ako rati i-concern na timeline. Le RPPL 11-31 na mlo effective October 1. Igaludo da alaps ra September dori. Igira mal appropriate ra sumang nga supplemental budget al mera March. Giram lo to da giram appropriate igal namo sa elto ba damang agidira concern ra time mal sumang. So, Mr. Sayo, we would appreciate the timeline. We have like a timeline. We have another supplemental budget that might be coming up that will give us an opportunity to appropriate the funds that can be that can go to the bank to help these people that we meant to help. So, if we can do something to speed up the process, that will be appreciated.
No,
If I may just add. And the reason why we were looking at that, it was from the list that you had written to the president about. So why were you able to provide that list? I guess that's the I'll say the list from there. And sabi listen the will not necessarily. I think we can be technical, Mr. Proctor. I think. And by doing this, we can go back and forth, and then, of course, the people that we intend to help. So you can go ahead and explain yourself.
Senator, I don't think there's any difference between us. More than happy to apply the law. What in terms of the list that we provided, I think there were 82 clients on the original list. As I say, we've reached out to 316. The 22 responses that we've received so far, I think the total amount, if we were to include everything, including businesses that were not operating during this period, if we included everything, it would be about $700,000 for those 22. In terms of the timeline per the law is that we provide the response by the 27th of March. I'm happy to provide the detail that we have today immediately so that you can see the types of information that we've received. And frankly, it would help the bank implement the policy of the OEK if this issue of the wording of the law could be reviewed. So all we're doing is trying to abide by the law. We're not trying to prevent the implementation of the law. We're trying to facilitate it. So if there's amendments that OEK would like to make to the law, then absolutely we will follow the amendments. So on timeline, I will provide this information immediately and then be happy to discuss what changes might be considered.
Thank you for that. I think I want to bring up the concern about the amount of loan written off. How are you going to handle that, and what is your policy about this written off? You said that you wrote off 27% of your total loan. That's a lot. And total written off is 9 million. What are your plans for that amount?
Thank you, Senator. So the 9 million is the total amount written off by the bank. In the period that I've been here, it's 5.7 million. The way that the bank manages that is that we set aside what we call a provision, which basically means that every new loan that we make, we set aside a certain amount of that loan and we put it in our pocket because it prepares us for future losses. We don't know specifically which loans will create losses, but it's just something in our pocket that can offset the loss when it happens. We call that a provision. So the 5.7 million of write-offs that we implemented in September was fully covered by provisions. At the same time, I amended our provisioning policy so that we put aside more money in the future to reduce the potential impact on the bank from further losses going forward. The next question then is, how do we intend to try to recover that 9 million? There's an active program in the bank to try to recover the money. I think banks generally, we look at, we tend to divide it between two different categories. One is, do the borrowers have the willingness to repay? Do they have the capacity to repay? If they don't have the capacity to repay, then there's clearly no benefit in harassing borrowers if they don't have the capacity to repay. If they have the willingness, or if they're not willing to repay, but they have the capacity, then we will follow up and we will apply the security and structure of the loan to try to protect the bank and the national interest. So that is a typical approach for all banks when they have bad debts. No different between a development bank and a commercial bank. But for us especially, the main approach is to sit with customers, try to agree a new repayment plan that probably extend the repayments, or reduce the interest rates, or whatever it may be, so that it meets with their capacity, as long as they have the willingness to repay.
President of the Senate.
she authorized 500,000, but you mentioned something like 700,000 to cover. And because I want it to be clear, because she's going to give you money, is what she said. So if you need 700,000, then write to her that we need 700,000 because we have to cover everybody, not cover some and leave some. So please clarify and then write a letter to her that we need 700,000 to cover those who were left. She didn't include in the 500,000.
Yes, thank you, President. I think this goes back to the discussion about the SMEs and the budget law. The budget law, as it's written at the moment, has a reference to a 500,000 appropriation for the bank, subject to the bank providing the information to OEK. The 22 responses we've received so far, if I add up everything in those 22 responses, the number comes to 700,000. However, based on how the law is written, not all of those 22 responses, or 700,000, falls within the law. So that's the current status. But I'll provide the information in detail.
Yeah,
to
probably because
Senator.
she can amend the law when she give you the money, because in the supplemental budget, she can amend the law to include the 22. So please submit it to her.
We'll amend the law and appropriate the money at the same time. So provide us the language.
I'd be very
We
happy.
can do that at the same time.
I'd be very happy to provide the information.
Floor Leader, Vice Chairman of the committee.
Looking at your your financial report, I understand the 9 million written off or charged off loans is the total of the last 3 years. It's the total of the last 3 years. So what happened now? When we write off, then how do you, it's completely off the books, or is there a possibility that it can become a receivable to the bank? Or you just write off and is there like a way in which you refer those bad loans to the the collection or for collection? Or?
Yes, Senator. All of the we have the following categories of loans. We have performing loans. We have what we call past due or loans in arrears, when they are between 1 and 90 days past due. The next category we call non-performing loans, which are loans that are between 90 and 180 days past due. Any loan that is more than 180 days past due, we charge off. So all of the loans that are past due, everything from 1 day through to more than 180 days, is with our collections department. And that collections department manages and prioritizes which borrowers to work with to see how we can best help them stabilize their financial position in a way that enables them to repay the loan to the best of their ability. So when we write off a loan, we don't forget about the loan, we don't forget about the borrower. We still want to work with the borrower to see how we can bring them back to a more stable footing. But we're trying to do it in a way that doesn't create unnecessary financial stress. And that's obviously the bad side of the financial industry that we see in other places. We're just trying to act in a professional way.
So do we have a mechanism, Chairman, in which we can sell off those bad loans to maybe a third party, or?
It is one potential route that we would like to explore. at this stage, the bank has not been selling off its bad debt. I think there's a variety of mechanisms that the bank can consider that it hasn't used in the past. But I think that's something that I'd like to introduce step by step. Right now, for me at the bank, there's some other priorities, but it's a very good suggestion and certainly something that I have in mind for the future.
Thank you. Can you explain? You mentioned the provisions for loan loss. How do you apply that in the loan process?
So the way that that banks work, there's known unknowns and unknown unknowns. Meaning, when a bank makes a loan, we know that on average there will be a certain percentage of loss in the future. But we don't know at the beginning when we make a loan which one that loss will occur in. So we apply, in essence, an average. We say, when we make this type of loan, our estimate is that X% of those loans will go bad. So we will set aside, if we're making a $100 loan for a particular purpose, we'll set aside a certain percentage to keep in our pocket for the future loans that go bad. And so that is the provisioning policy that I have updated, which gives the bank better mitigation against loss, better protection against loss.
And so to determine that percentage it varies from year to year, or it's constant throughout?
The program works so that we vary the percentage by product, but we vary the percentage based on how the loan is performing. So when a loan becomes 1 day past due, we increase the percentage. When it becomes 90 days past due, we increase the percentage. So that by the time it becomes 180 days past due and we charge it off, we should have enough in our pocket so it doesn't have an immediate impact on our income statement.
Mr. Proctor, I know the time is about 4:30, so we'll try and have 30 more minutes just to cover up everything. So can you, based on the financial statement, let me see, on your balance sheet, especially on your assets, it says real estate owned. So can you explain what that mean in, do the bank own assets and buildings? Or?
This is unfortunately, it's one of those technical financial jargon that the financial industry uses. It essentially, that line refers to property that the bank has foreclosed in the past. So effectively, the bank owns that property because a borrower failed to meet the repayments. It would have gone probably to an auction, a foreclosure auction. Probably the bids were not sufficient to meet the bank's expectations or the appraisal of the property. And so the bank has retained ownership of that property with a view to selling it at a time when it can achieve a better price. But that's what that particular line means.
So is the number there the number for the properties or the number of the amount of the
It's
the
the dollar value of those.
Are there any work going on those for other revenue going into the bank?
We're always looking to see what we can do to maximize the value. So again, that's part of the collections program for the bank as to how we manage the loans that have gone bad, including those foreclosed assets. Sometimes the assets may be subject to complex legal situations, so it's not so straightforward to immediately sell them.
The reason why I'm asking, it seems like the report has still occurred the same numbers throughout 21 all the way till now.
Which means that the bank has not foreclosed on properties in the last 3 years. It's basically the same number of properties. It hasn't foreclosed on new properties.
Well, another question that brings into my mind are the loans that are, so when you talked about your report and you mentioned that you're moving to a mortgage loan, so that means you're writing off or you discontinue the microfinance loan and offer a mortgage loan? Is that what it is?
Yes, that's correct. I think on the bottom, page 7, at the bottom of page 7, item C, products recently withdrawn. As we introduce these new products, we withdrew 2 products. One is microloans and one we call chattel mortgages. And there are 6 reasons listed here as to why we did that. On microloans, that product was, it had 2 types. Up to $15,000 was unsecured. From $15,000 to $25,000 it was secured. It was offered at a very cheap rate, 6%, and the product was restricted in use, meaning borrowers could only use it for aspects related to the property. What we found with that product was, firstly, the pricing was too low to cover the costs for the bank. Secondly, especially for the unsecured element, the bank was taking significant losses. And we saw a disturbing trend where people were coming to the bank, getting an unsecured loan for $15,000, and then immediately leaving the country, moving offshore. So we decided that that was just too high risk a product. In addition to that, the new products that we introduced are not restricted in use. You can take the home equity loan, use it to consolidate debt, which you couldn't do with the microloans. I think there's another aspect here, which is the commercial banks in Palau offer those products already, those unsecured loans and chattel mortgage loans. In essence, what was happening is that government funding was being used to subsidize loans at below market rate, which resulted in losses for the bank. And I don't think that's the right role for the development bank. I think we should be focused on providing the products that the commercial banks cannot provide, especially secured loans on property. On chattel mortgages, a lot of those loans related to boats. We took, I think, 2.3 million of bad debt on those products. So the combination of those 2 products was creating a problem for the bank, and that's why we withdrew the products and replaced them with a product that is longer term, so the monthly repayment is lower, and it's unrestricted in use. So we think it's a win-win, it's a benefit for the customer, and it's a benefit for the bank.
I'll yield the floor to Senator Inabo.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Proctor, so if the RPPL 11-31 that's gonna provide assistance for the interest and accrued interest and late charges on those certain loans, and then there's a requirement in there for the bank to restructure that loan and make it so the customer can continue to pay for it with a different term, and depending on the current financial situation and ability to pay. You would put those loans back on the books, or it will continue to be on the charged-off list?
We would only put the loans back on the books if it was a performing loan. I think in some of these situations, the business is effectively not viable anymore. So what will happen is that the appropriation funds will be used to reduce the debt for the borrower, but it won't be sufficient to return the loans to performing or to enable the businesses to continue.
Okay, but if the economic situation changes and those they can become performing loans, that can change the classification, right?
Correct, yes. If we can, which is what we're constantly trying to do with all of our bad debt. We're constantly trying to get it back into the performing book, and that's one of the objectives of the collections team, to get those struggling loans back into the performing book.
Okay, my question is on the page 4, under item number 2. You said you terminated the MOU with the USDA and you are exploring revised arrangements for USDA grants. Can you please explain that? And can you please explain whether you are going to discontinue the loans under the USDA program? That's what we need to understand. Thank you.
So the first answer is that all existing loans under the USDA program continue unchanged. The reason why we canceled the MOU was established many years ago, I think in the 90s, 94 I think was the original MOU with USDA, and there was an amendment signed in 2011. This program provided a benefit to Palauans in that the USDA provided mortgages, which were long-term mortgages, 30 years, at low interest rates. And we were happy to support that program. However, we were finding that USDA was struggling to obtain a budget from US Congress for it to provide those loans. So we had situations where applicants came to the bank completed the extremely complex application forms for USDA on behalf of those applicants, and we were then waiting 3 or 4 years for a response from USDA. We had another situation where one applicant passed away whilst they were waiting for a response to the loan application. That created a reputational risk for the bank and left the bank in a situation where we were at risk of misleading applicants, that they had hope that they would be given a loan which was not taking place as they had hoped. So we withdrew from that program, but we're actively exploring with USDA alternative grants, whether it be rural grants or they have a series of specific grant programs that I'd like the bank to participate in. So it's not stepping away from the USDA relationship, it's simply that program which wasn't working because of lack of funds, budget funds for USDA. Over and above that, the DFC, Development Finance Corporation, which is another US entity, has offered a program for the Pacific supporting SMEs and are looking to work with banks across the Pacific who can deliver this. It's a $50 million program plus I think a $20 million guarantee program. So we've submitted an application to be a participant in that program. We've passed the first phase of the review and we're currently in the second phase of review by DFC. So we're disappointed that USDA couldn't facilitate the ongoing MOU arrangements, but I think it's better that we're just straight and honest with our applicants, that that program simply wasn't acting or operating in the way that was originally envisaged.
Dr. Lumps will follow up on that.
So, Chairman, thank you, Mr. Proctor. I've been working with the Palau Housing Authority regarding the MOU between USDA and Palau Housing Authority after you terminated the MOU. And actually, I met with U.S. Ambassador today regarding the MOU and how they can help us with the housing crisis in Palau. So the MOU is being reviewed by the Palau Housing Authority, and the Attorney General have submitted her recommendation to MOU to the Palau Housing Authority regarding the MOU, and I gave it to our legal counsel yesterday to review for comment. And according to Diego, he will be coming to Palau. He's planning to train some Palauans or Palau Housing Authority loan officers to package the loan, which we sort of disagree. I met with the Palau Housing Authority Board of Directors a few days ago, and we were able to discuss about the MOU and what we can amend to benefit Palau regarding the USDA grant and loans. At the same time, I have our legal counsel drafted a resolution which I will introduce in our next session regarding USDA program, that if they can see the possibility of USDA coming directly to Palau instead of being delivered through the regional area in Guam and Honolulu. And that's what we talk about today with ambassadors. So he said they will talk with Diego this evening, and we'll look into it. And we need funding for infrastructure, especially. And we have been given a portion of property in IRA. So we were planning to see you next week, but I hope you will be able to make that appointment.
I'll be happy to make that appointment. Thank you, Senator.
Last comment, so we'll give the floor to Vice Chairman of the committee and the rest of the senators, and after that we'll close.
Bismillah, Chairman. Really quick. Chairman gam other board of CEO. I omesega list of product. We're quite happy that you're coming up with a very favorable considerations for the different product that you're offering. One product that we've been kind of contemplating about is the educational loan. We have a program under the scholarship office that also offer loans to students. Unfortunately, their track record for collection is very poor. And we were contemplating whether this would be something that we can give to institution like NDBP for it to take on that particular aspect of the loan. One, we feel that there's a lot of need for young people, young Palauans, especially young students, to pursue their education, but financing is always a barrier for them to achieve those education that we need for them to return back and give back to the country. So that's something I wanted to bring to your attention, and hopefully we can work together. Maybe you can put up some recommendations how best we can make that in a form of a legislation and get it passed.
Thank you, Senator. I think actually there are two aspects that we've been looking at internally. One is medical referrals, the cost of medical referrals, and the second is scholarships. Happy to explore, but what I decided to do as the fastest, most efficient way of addressing that is to launch this home equity product and commercial real estate equity product, because the use of proceeds can be for medical referrals, it can be for scholarship, paying off scholarship amounts, it can be for any purpose needed by a borrower. And that's, I think, what has been missing in the product suite for the bank so far. It's had very restrictive types of products which have been beneficial for particular borrowers, but this product is much more flexible and I think will immediately address the concern that you're raising.
Senator Tabulwal, kapong utuli.
Chairman, thank you, Mr. Proctor. I'll share the concern to the board to think about. Ay ganam sa malung lakti imol tol dirak rang sil ako ron tang sugiril sel tiga mar displaced. Basta ka mo mesri tege ati ois raga chairman. Ngani abes basur orol el alchan waring tumno besel displaced tumingel al gilir sia sia gidri gilo a togol wasing adjustment an lamar private owner. Ya tal sander uriu le to sia rungur ara utma ma dia ka bolong as sem sem na mumre tokoy. Sia besel adang ngara tola displacement. E wade gisa tikingun gira displaced makolonita se gabo mesa sei. Wal gora tul tokoya sei. Asukuma ala kersere la ange displaced emrale gol mutar sura tola la loni. Komen mon eremdi hara yang ngarang lungu ulgirel ceng marang sigida gora. Ongirung asya sum ku adang arsi o ngita ngi sura tokola besel play. Ele gong yang moralain di warbek ala lube ngani aku toko betsel morngi. Aktif udar sa gigi dembom mo gora malas a gel parasir kami. Toko ngita sembronya alda sigira adal gora displays te laot adara tokola dalang okla. Le sea besel basur orol direk la mo segi. Aku ngita ngis gil sembronya gora te el segi del toko in palasim albornya gora hospital la du de kain seringi man. Ale gora adal gora kasingilem gora katmukul giri. Sigida ontiga chairman sula.
Giving to send the area sel ulabang gira displaced people. Munso pa rin explore ng lukong kalamar natin.
Chairman, utalay kama President abang kama Vice Chairman, marpekal board members. Agi akmam terar bekrokul senator se maldimreng asuliw mlo sa pamiwon se kitial teal wak mas kamamatay man mitlobong gamiw wak patakaw ngere kal development tertial bank ending malgoratir ka beto ka tira ka ngarap talma man so mamlogel girel tel performance report man sugum guk kimesaw ngil time kimlutan mo am gotong girel yatlutan mem guk poto mesay kay gitul guk pebira matagal wasit yal report mal technical yagi po mo mesaygal nga alsel and agi mo require abe pira information la ako koraso mamlomes mabol sab ela pekl member sa committee mar senator sa albolomes ay gigit tel performance report tegi po ngatmok lal mo tel pira karmami yagi mo durok lekong mal sab ela tulutan al mogapte edwes adangi malgorab to ka tiro ka suat lo mes to ka suat al masahot al girela abe es el development tra agi dimreng asulew ya aku ka bol ngarngi ya aku kor on temiwul mera senate tengka kita senator inapol ngartiang ma president tra senate makamam sa pamil ko melu usel me ya ko kome sa gay itu ko korabe eslulda sul ko meso miwul almamot mok los pe auto malubeng gora ongit tel girela chensala ralu labang aki malwiling al motong okle ko mga datu lawang kamil direk Malaway se kwate alungul akmuti alol ko yung muskaw chairman ma president matiguk pamtu ka last statement kami we.
Will itasil sa chairman ko restra kalik sa raw. Tiap namo maklok. Mamalam lera telaklok. Tudori. Deng baral gamat ding kada bal time. Leng patoka giredal balmol bal kakargere sma. Maka kamading dirgo besang artial por. De akmal tangatam na sois belum tritikal adra board ng artial before. Hindi, mekmul mora CEO. Agi ngaltangatal, makakaltangatal tal board ko nangyate el screen ngilti adal mal semong imdura tokora banking sira boxi sabeng uktimlo players and part del world mangela board make sure ang kutmok lang el say la board hindi ngil mangari say idol kora a concern magel loget ngi senator Sangbaw say mo reflection ra e mindel mera board la seng direl giram malmol scrutinize direl chiran gal CEO ibang dong ngila relam ding gi utilize say lungil do ma collaboration ra dong alam e so over ge ni ra patokol toy make sure that tirak like policy malubang la ra belaw say gi daw kungil lu alel gi plam establish ngi mama mal appreciate ti ayel te algo nemer madmiata ki rong smiu e ko gi wasi ong o ti asia singra rele labor di ngwasel bolon ngi mal mol mal sel direkal kiramalo tap om di da gi del tol motor se atar klol made al se gi del SME loan agi larong smi kan choose ra time dur al sel magi mol mutal mo dura CEO e wai sel offer ga ngaya somam masabok balu ngari mam agi mer ki sel breda time agi mel lo dar sel hor mi mada dikmul meritiang e kumte kaida chairman til kalom tera warden makubra sulu kui te kalom tera CEO e opman masaula
Al masula nga hearing adi meritiam ro.